Hello everybody, Connor here, and welcome back to another episode of Gaming Retrospective. Today we're going to be talking about everybody's favorite sequel to Sonic the Hedgehog, Sonic 2 for the Sega Genesis. Not to get it confused with the Master System version of the game, which is everybody's least favorite. The original Sonic the Hedgehog was the first video game I ever played, so it holds a special place in my heart. I have so many fond memories of trying to beat the game over and over again and never getting past Marble Zone. I remember waking up on Christmas morning in 2006 and opening up a PlayStation 2 Slim with Sonic Mega Collection Plus. I couldn't believe my eyes. After all this time, I was finally able to play the other 2D Sonic games like Sonic 3, Sonic & Knuckles, and Sonic the Hedgehog 2. Sonic 2 has a very interesting development history. 3 months after the release of Sonic 1, Mark Cerny pitched a sequel for the 1992 Christmas season. Unfortunately, Sega thought it was too soon and ended up shelving the project, but changed their mind 2 months later, and development started in early 1992. Promotion for Sonic 2 also started in early 1992 as well. An early build of the game was used in the Nickelodeon game show called Nick Arcade, where contestants got to play through the first zone of the game. The game ended up releasing worldwide on Tuesday, November 21st, 1992. Sega promoted the release date as Sonic Tuesday and had to use air shipping to ensure stores had the game on time. Japan did end up getting the game 3 days early, so technically it wasn't exactly a global release. The game was also later bundled with Sega Genesis consoles shortly after. The original concept of Sonic 2 was going to have time travel as a core mechanic of the game. This concept ended up being scrapped and used in a later game, but it's interesting to look at the concept art and see what could have been. One feature that did make it to the final game was the addition of Tails. He was designed to be a companion to Sonic so siblings could play together. Along with this, they introduced a 2-player split-screen mode where players could race each other through 3 traditional zones in the special stage. One big thing that sets Sonic 2 apart from Sonic 1 is the abundance of new zones. Instead of each zone having 3 acts, they now have 2. This allows for many more different environments and make your Marble Zones and your Labyrinth Zones a lot more tolerable. The game starts out with Emerald Hill Zone, a reskin of Green Hill Zone from Sonic 1. This zone features the same green grass, palm trees, and waterfalls. I think it's a little bit more fast-paced too compared to Green Hill Zone. Another fun fact is this zone gets its name because you have the opportunity to collect all 7 Chaos Emeralds in this stage. Unlike Sonic 1 where you had to collect 50 rings and jump into the giant ring at the end of each act, Sonic 2 is a little different. You still have to collect 50 rings, but instead of carrying them to the end of the level, you access the special stage through the checkpoints. Emerald Hill Zone has a total of 8 checkpoints, which means it is possible to collect all Chaos Emeralds by the end of the first zone. The special stages in this game are a bit different compared to Sonic 1, the biggest difference being the switch from 2D to 3D. Sonic now runs through a half pipe instead of rolling through a maze, and the goal is to collect a certain amount of rings before each checkpoint. A lot of people prefer this style of special stage, but I've never really been a fan of them. I feel like they rely on memorization over skill, and the draw distance also isn't the best. Another new addition is the addition of the 7th Chaos Emerald. Once you collect the last emerald, you get the ability to become supersonic when you collect 50 rings, which lets you run faster and have invincibility. The only limitation is that the ring count slowly goes down, and once you run out of rings, you lose the supersonic abilities. I really like this addition to the game because it gives an actual incentive of collecting the Chaos Emeralds. One last addition to the game is the Spin Dash. This lets you get to Sonic's top speed in the matter of a few seconds. This move has become a mainstay in the series and makes the lack of it in previous games very noticeable. After Emerald Hill Zone, you go to Chemical Plant, which is easily the most iconic level in the game. This is where my Sonic 2 experience as a kid usually ended. There's a very specific part in Act 2 that has some difficult platforming, and if you don't get through it before the water rises, it becomes a lot more difficult. One thing that Sonic 2 did differently than the first game was change the level design. They were able to increase the difficulty of each level without sacrificing the speed. There is a great balance between speed sections and platforming, which makes the level feel a lot more balanced. If you survive the platforming sections of Chemical Plant, you get to Aquatic Ruin Zone, which is the water level of the game. The best part about this level is that more skilled and experienced players are able to skip the water sections entirely. I enjoy this level, but it's one of the most forgettable in the game. It's a bit overshadowed by the other zones, and it's not as intense as Labyrinth Zone was, so it's not talked about as much. I did enjoy the boss fight in this level though, I thought it was really creative. After Aquatic Ruin, you reach one of my favorite levels in the game, Casino Night Zone. This zone has a really colorful and vibrant design. It also introduces a bunch of new gimmicks like the pinball sections and the gambling. The music in this level is terrific too. It's really catchy and makes the zone a lot more enjoyable. The next level is Hilltop Zone, and this level has an interesting dynamic. The zone has a lot more challenging platform sections compared to the last few zones. There's a lot of underground sections similar to Marble Zone, but is a lot less tedious. They also brought back the seesaws from Starlight Zone, which was a nice addition. The boss is also a remix of the boss from Marble Zone, which made the boss a little bit harder. After Hilltop is Mystic Cave Zone, which is one of the most infamous zones in the game for a very specific reason. In Act 2 there's a pit that you could easily walk into if you're going too fast, and there's no way to get out once you fall, so the pit has become iconic for that reason. This is another one of my favorite zones in the game. It's a bit slower paced compared to the other zones, but the environment is really cool, so it makes up for it. If you don't get stuck in the pit, Oil Ocean Zone is next. This zone is very vertical compared to the other zones. There's elevators and green platforms that take you up, and there's oil slicks that bring you down back to the lower paths. It's one of the zones that stands out to me the most. It's more challenging, but it's balanced, unlike the next zone that comes. Metropolis Zone is next, and it's by far my least favorite zone in all of the 2D Sonic games. They even added a third act to this level, so it takes even longer to get past. The enemy placement is terrible. They designed the level so you have no choice but to get hit by the enemies. You got the crabs and the mantis, which are terrible. But the little cherry on top is the stars. The stars. Don't even get me started. I feel like this level is try not to activate the stars simulator, because the moment you activate one, there's like a 90% chance you'll hit the rest and you'll activate them. The music's good though. After Metropolis Zone, you get to Sky Chase Zone. This zone lets you catch your breath after having to go through Metropolis Zone. You spend the entirety of the level on Sonic's plane where you dodge a bunch of enemies that come your way. It works as a cutscene to get you from Metropolis Zone to the next zone. Wing Fortress Zone takes place on Eggman's airship. This level has the hardest platforming in the game by far because the majority takes place over a bottomless pit. There's sections on the top of the ship that are more fast-paced, so there's a good balance between the two. The boss is one of the hardest in the game, and it takes a lot of patience to get through. After the boss, there's a cutscene that takes you to the final stage of the game, Death Egg Zone. This level also has really good music, but you only get to hear it for a few seconds until the boss theme starts. There's also no rings in this level, so you're forced to be one hit while you fight the final boss. The first boss is Silver Sonic. He's pretty easy to beat, you just have to make sure you don't jump on his spikes. Silver Sonic isn't too serious as a boss, so it's more of an appetizer to the true final boss. Once Silver Sonic's defeated, you move on to the next boss room, then you have to defeat the Death Egg robot. I've always had trouble beating this boss, so I usually tend to take it a bit slowly. He has spikes for hands, and if your jumps aren't pixel perfect, he will one-hit you and you'll have to start the level over again. Once the boss is defeated, you get the end cutscene with Sonic falling through the sky, and that's the game in all its glory. It's a lot more cohesive than the previous game and has double the zones. There was actually supposed to be more, but a lot of zones were cut due to time constraints. The most popular out of them was the Hidden Palace Zone. This one was shown a lot during promotional artwork and was somewhat playable in the prototypes of the game. The player was originally going to be warped to the zone after collecting the 7th Chaos Emerald and was supposed to have a cutscene that would teach the player about Super Sonic. The name and the premise of the level was later used for Sonic and Knuckles, and the 2013 mobile port remade the zone from the ground up and featured it in the finished game. You could access it by falling in the pit in Mystic Cave Act 2. Another unfinished zone was Dust Hill Zone. This zone was showcased early on in development but was never featured in any of the demos. There's only one image of the zone and it looks like it would have been a desert-themed level. The concept of Dust Hill was considered for the 2011 remake of Sonic CD. It would have been called Desert Dazzle, and the concept image shows the zone would have shared many similarities to Dust Hill. The concept was then put into reality in 2017 with the release of Sonic Mania. Mirage Saloon Zone shares many similarities with Dust Hill and Desert Dazzle. Wood Zone was also a level worked on during development when the time travel mechanic was still being considered. It was meant to be a past version of Casino Night Zone. The level is seen in multiple demo versions of the game but was never finished. Concept art of this zone was reused for Mushroom Hill Zone from Sonic & Knuckles, so it seems like Sega reworked the concept later on. The last unfinished zone is the most interesting to me. Its name was originally called Genocide City Zone. This was a result of the team working on Sonic 2 having a limited understanding of the English language. The name was later changed to Cyber City Zone and would have been a factory-type level similar to Metropolis Zone. The layout for this level was finished, but the rest was not, so due to time constraints they reused the level layout for Metropolis Zone Act 3. Some of the graphics were reused later on for the machine in Sonic Spinball. Although these zones didn't make the final game, these concepts were still reused in some way. Overall, Sonic 2 was a huge step up and introduced many concepts for the series that are still around today. Despite this, there are still some flaws like cheap enemy placement and difficulty spikes throughout the level. Personally, I'd rate this game a 9 out of 10. It's a very enjoyable experience to play through. This game has also been released a ton, so I'd recommend playing it if you haven't yet. Comment down below your thoughts on the game, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Peace.